So now it's time to learn about the Canvas API. Now, Canvas is primarily a 2D drawing API, and it essentially gives us what we can think of as a blank canvas that we can essentially draw onto. Now, we can draw things such as lines, we can draw images, any kind of shapes, we can add text, and most likely anything you can think of. Now, before we get going, it's important to realize that Canvas is for drawing pixels. It's not like SVG graphics where we have particular vectors or shapes, which means that it doesn't give us any objects that we can then attach event handlers to. We can only attach events to the actual canvas object itself, where we can bind events such as mouse down, mouse up, and so forth. So for example, if you do in fact want to use existing shapes, so for instance you have some vector imagery already, it's probable that you want to then use an SVG. Whereas if we want to create a game, or as we're going to do in this chapter, is allow us to create some kind of e-signature, we can then turn to a more advanced, lower level API such as Canvas. With Canvas being a lower level API, it then gives us some more control over our drawings, which then uses less memory, but it comes at the cost of having to write quite a lot of code, which can seem quite daunting at first, but we're going to explore some of the basics of the API. So really we want to turn to Canvas for things such as charts, graphs, diagrams, which could then be dynamic, creating some kind of drawing tool, and perhaps some kind of game. So first what we're going to do is jump into our HTML template, and we're going to add a canvas to our page. So underneath, we can add a canvas tag and then close it off. Now we could use CSS, however Canvas is pixel based, so we're going to specify a width and a height as attributes. So we can add the width and the height, and then below we essentially want to detect where the canvas is present for the current user. Now, if it isn't present, we can then say something like your browser doesn't support Canvas. So if we save this out, we see absolutely nothing because Canvas will not render any kind of DOM inside of it, such as this text. So what it means is if the browser does not support Canvas, we will then see this text here because this is an unsupported element. Now we can also do one better than this, and we can then feature detect. So if we go ahead and, like all the other videos, we can create an initialization function. We then want to detect if Canvas does in fact exist. Then we want to initialize our function and then add all the functionality to our page. So how do we go about detecting whether Canvas does in fact exist? Now there are many ways that we could do this. We could create a Canvas element, and this has been a solid way that we can feature detect in the past. However, there is a newer way because every modern browser that implements Canvas does in fact support this property. So we can actually say window, and we can look for this HTML canvas element. So this is a property on the window object. You can see we have provides properties and methods for manipulating the layout and presentation of elements. So if we then were to add a console log, we can say supports canvas exclamation. We can jump into the browser, open our console, and we then have our console log. So this is just a brief introduction to HTML5's Canvas API. This is a really, really powerful API that's been added to the web platform in recent years. We're going to look at some basic setup and discuss this 2D context that allows us to then draw things to our canvas. We're then going to create some very basic shapes and then go ahead and start building an e-signature where we're going to add our own signature. We can also hit save and download it as an image as well. So now we've learned how to feature detect. This is a nice way that we can detect with JavaScript and also provide any fallback in the browser. We could of course hide this element entirely if we wanted to with JavaScript as well. So let's move on to the next lesson and get started with some Canvas.